Alien girl gifted the human a small token, only later admitting why her counsel rose for him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Ethan Carter, a former military officer, stood on the edge of the city's bustling spaceport, his gaze lost in the vast stretch of the alien world in front of him. The sprawling metropolis was unlike anything he had seen on Earth. Towering spires, neon lights, and ships of all shapes and sizes hovering in the sky. Ethan had been assigned a mission here, but the task was anything but ordinary. His job was simple: to assist in the peace talks between Earth and the Tan Dominion, a powerful alien empire. However, Ethan was unprepared for the complexity of the assignment. He was tasked with guarding the Tan Queen's proxy, a clone of the Queen herself. This proxy, named Lyra, was to perform the less critical functions of the Queen's duties. As Ethan stood there, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. He had dealt with military operations, harsh environments, and diplomatic protocols, but this felt different. Lyra, the alien proxy, arrived shortly after, stepping out of a sleek shuttle, her tall frame and striking red skin impossible to miss. She was stunning, with long silver hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through the world around her. Ethan couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. The Queen of the Tan Dominion, a force to be reckoned with, had sent her clone, her proxy, to Earth for the peace talks, and this woman, Lyra, was her representative. Despite the cool, professional demeanor Lyra maintained, Ethan noticed a subtle vulnerability in her gaze, one that intrigued him. They exchanged pleasantries, and as she spoke, he noticed that she carried herself with grace and authority. Yet there was something about her, an underlying sorrow, a sense of duty that went beyond just following orders. Over the next few days, Ethan's role became clear. He was not just a bodyguard, but a silent observer of the delicate political dance between Earth and the Tan Dominion. Lyra, despite being a clone, possessed a deep intelligence and a complex personality that made her more than just a mere proxy. She had her own thoughts, desires, and struggles. Ethan began to understand her better. She wasn't just the Queen's replica. She was a person in her own right, carrying the weight of an empire on her shoulders. As they spent more time together, the connection between them grew. The usual professional distance slowly eroded, replaced by moments of genuine conversation. Lyra's vulnerability began to shine through, and Ethan found himself more drawn to her than he had expected. She was more than just an alien to him. She was a woman with her own dreams, hopes, and fears. The more he learned about her, the more he realized that her role in the peace talks was more complicated than he had been told. Lyra wasn't just a symbol of the Tan Dominion. She was a key player in their future. And as the days passed, Ethan started to see her not just as his charge, but as someone who was struggling with her own identity. Someone who was trying to make her own choices, despite the constraints imposed on her. He could see the conflict within her, the tension between what she was meant to be and what she wanted to become. As Ethan and Lyra continued to navigate the delicate political landscape, the bond between them deepened in subtle ways. The days turned into weeks, and their professional relationship shifted, albeit imperceptibly, towards something more personal. Ethan's role as her bodyguard had expanded beyond merely protecting her. He was now someone she confided in, someone she trusted. There were quiet moments when they shared their thoughts about the future, her future as the Queen's proxy, and his future as a man torn between duty and the growing pull he felt toward her. Their conversations, often brief but always meaningful, took place during their walks through the city's grand halls or over meals in the royal quarters. Lyra, despite her calm exterior, carried the weight of her existence. She had been created for a purpose, to serve as a stand-in for the Queen. Yet, deep down, she wondered if that purpose was all she was destined to be. She couldn't escape the nagging thought that there was more to life than the rigid role her creators had designed for her. Ethan, for his part, couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to her. He had been trained to observe, to protect, and to be detached from personal attachments. But Lyra was different. her complexity, her intellect, and the vulnerability that she tried so hard to conceal made him see her as more than just a political tool. As they sat together in a quiet corner of the embassy one evening, a soft breeze from the open windows carrying the faint scent of the night air, Lyra spoke in a tone that was almost wistful. "Do you ever wonder, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "if we are just defined by the roles we are given? If we are more than the titles we hold?" Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. He had always been the one who followed orders, the one who did what was necessary without asking questions. But in that moment, he found himself questioning his own purpose. "I used to think that my role was all I was," he said slowly, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "That everything about me was defined by the uniform I wore, the job I did. But lately, I'm not so sure." Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes studying his face intently. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence wavering. "I've never really thought about it, not until now. But you make me question everything. Your existence isn't just about being a queen's proxy, is it? You're more than that." Lyra's lips parted as if to respond, but then she stopped, as if considering his words carefully. "I suppose I am," she said softly. "But how does one break free from the chains of their design? How do I choose who I want to be when I've been created to follow someone else's path?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts and unacknowledged feelings. Ethan reached out, almost instinctively, and placed a hand on hers. "Maybe it's not about breaking free," he said gently. "Maybe it's about finding your own path within the one you've been given." Lyra looked down at their hands, her fingers lightly brushing against his. She had never allowed herself to consider such thoughts, but Ethan's words felt like a lifeline, a possibility she had never dared to entertain. Their connection, though subtle, was undeniable now. They were two souls, bound by circumstance, yet finding solace in each other's presence. The complexity of their situation, their different worlds, their different duties, loomed over them. But for the first time, Lyra wondered if there was more to their relationship than just duty and obligation. Ethan felt the same pull, the same tension. He wasn't just guarding her. He was beginning to care for her, in ways he hadn't expected. It was a quiet realization, but one that shifted something deep within him. Neither of them could predict where this journey would take them, but in that moment, they found a quiet understanding. They were more than just their roles. They were more than just the titles they had been given. And as the evening wore on, they both knew that something had changed between them, though neither of them could yet name what that change was. As the days went by, Ethan and Lyra found themselves in increasingly delicate situations, where their bond grew stronger with every challenge they faced. Their time together, though often spent navigating political affairs, was punctuated with quiet moments of connection as they continued to work side by side. Lyra, despite her composed exterior, had begun to open up more to Ethan, sharing glimpses of her true self, something she had never dared to do before. Her once guarded demeanor slowly melted away, replaced by a growing trust. Ethan, too, began to let down his guard. His role as a protector had always been about duty, but with Lyra, it had become something more. She was no longer just his charge. She had become a person he genuinely cared for. They spent long hours discussing matters of diplomacy, but those discussions always led to deeper conversations about their hopes and fears. One evening, as they sat together in the royal chambers, Ethan couldn't help but notice the change in her. The sadness that had lingered in her eyes had softened, replaced by something he hadn't seen before, a flicker of hope. He watched her carefully, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup as she stared out the window at the stars. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, breaking the silence between them. Lyra turned to face him, her violet eyes meeting his gaze. "I've been wondering," she began, her voice thoughtful, "if perhaps I've been looking at things all wrong. I've spent my life trying to live up to others' expectations, believing that I could never be more than what I was created to be. But now, I'm not so sure." Ethan leaned forward, sensing the shift in her words. "You don't have to be just what others expect of you, Lyra," he said gently. "You're not a tool or a symbol. You're a person, and you have the power to choose who you want to be." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked vulnerable, like a woman who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. I want to believe that, she whispered. But it's hard. There are so many forces at play, so many people who rely on me to stay in line, to follow the rules. And yet, I can't ignore the part of me that longs for something more. Something real. Ethan reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. You don't have to do this alone, he said, his voice full of conviction. I'm here, and I'll help you, no matter what. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at their hands. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine. She had never allowed herself to rely on anyone before, never trusted anyone enough to let them in. But with Ethan, it felt different. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders alone. Thank you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, his thumb gently brushing over her hand. Anytime, he said, his words sincere. You don't have to thank me. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, the intensity of their shared gaze speaking volumes. There was something unspoken between them, a connection that neither could ignore. Despite their differences, despite the world they came from, they had found something in each other that was undeniable. As the night wore on, they both realized that their journey together had only just begun. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges that neither of them could predict, but for the first time, they both felt ready to face it. Together. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Lyra continued to grow closer, their connection becoming undeniable. Despite the political tension surrounding them, there were moments of peace, moments where they could simply be two people who shared an understanding of what it meant to struggle, to feel lost. Ethan had come to admire Lyra's strength and her intelligence, but it was her vulnerability, the quiet way she carried the weight of her world, that drew him to her the most. They had spent countless hours discussing everything from politics to personal dreams, slowly building a bond that was both deep and meaningful. Yet, the reality of their situation was never far from their minds. Lyra's role as a proxy was a constant reminder of the divide between them. She was the Queen's representative, a figurehead meant to embody power, not emotion. And Ethan, though a trusted protector, was still human, an outsider in a world that had its own set of rules. As they walked through the royal gardens one evening, the stars above them casting a soft glow over the scene, Lyra spoke again of her doubts. I've been thinking, she began, her voice quiet, about everything we've discussed. About what you said, finding my own path within the one I've been given. It sounds so simple, yet it feels impossible. Ethan turned to her, his expression gentle. It's not easy, he said, his tone reassuring. I never said it would be. But you've already taken the first step. You've started questioning your purpose, and that's more than most people ever do. Lyra sighed, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. But what if I'm not meant to change anything? What if this is all I'm supposed to be? A stand-in, a shadow of the Queen. Ethan took a step closer to her, his presence comforting. You are not a shadow, he said firmly. You are Lyra. And that's enough. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but your own. She looked at him then, really looked at him, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. And what about you, Ethan? She asked softly. What do you want? Ethan paused for a moment, the weight of her question settling in. What did he want? It was a question he hadn't allowed himself to truly consider, not with everything that had happened. But standing there in that quiet garden with Lyra, the answer was clearer than he expected. I want to help you, he said simply. I want to see you live the life you deserve, not the one you've been told to live. Lyra's heart skipped a beat at his words. There was a sincerity in his voice, a depth to his feelings that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time. And what if that life is one where you're not by my side? She asked, the vulnerability in her voice almost too much to bear. Ethan shook his head, his gaze unwavering. Then I'll make sure you never have to live it alone. Lyra took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over her. The path ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with obstacles, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't walking it alone. She wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She was a person with her own future to create. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with affection for her. Anytime, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. They stood there in the quiet of the garden, the weight of their shared promise hanging between them, a silent understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt ready to face it together. As time passed, the connection between Ethan and Lyra continued to grow, evolving into something neither of them had expected. Their bond, once built on duty and mutual respect, had deepened into trust and something more, something neither of them dared to name just yet. They spent countless hours together, discussing not only the delicate political issues at hand, but also their personal hopes and dreams. For Lyra, these conversations were like a breath of fresh air, a way to escape the pressures of her role as a proxy. Ethan had always been a constant presence in her life, but now he had become her confidant, the one person she could rely on in a world that seemed determined to use her as nothing more than a pawn. One afternoon, as they walked through the palace gardens, Lyra stopped in her tracks, her gaze drifting to the horizon. Ethan, sensing her shift in mood, turned to her. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly. Lyra hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should share her thoughts, but then she spoke, her voice quiet yet filled with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About my life, my purpose, all of it." She began, her words heavy with the weight of the burden she carried. "And I keep wondering if I'm truly meant to be something more. If I can be more than just the Queen's proxy, more than just a symbol of power." Ethan's heart ached as he listened to her. He knew all too well the toll that living up to expectations could take on someone, especially someone like Lyra, who had been thrust into a role that was never truly her own. "You don't have to be just that," Ethan said gently, taking a step closer to her. "You've always been more than that. You're not defined by the title you've been given." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Ethan's words were sincere, and in that moment, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. Hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a way to live for herself. "But how?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How do I find my own path when I've spent my whole life following someone else's?" Ethan smiled softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "You take one step at a time," he said. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just follow what feels right in your heart, and I'll be right here, supporting you every step of the way." The sincerity in his voice made Lyra's heart swell. She had never allowed herself to believe that someone could truly care for her, not for her role, not for what she represented, but for who she was deep down. Ethan had proven that, time and time again. "Thank you," Lyra said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything. For seeing me, not just as the Queen's stand-in, but as me." Ethan's grip on her hand tightened, and he leaned in slightly, his voice full of conviction. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. You never will be." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their unspoken words hanging between them. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt ready to face it together, whatever it might bring. As they continued their walk through the gardens, the sun beginning to set in the distance, they both knew that their journey was just beginning. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, and that thought alone gave them the strength to keep moving forward. As Lyra and Ethan continued their journey together, the days seemed to blend into one long, quiet understanding. Their bond had grown, not just in moments of shared conversation, but in the way they moved together through the challenges that faced them. Lyra was still the proxy, the Queen's stand-in, but her role no longer felt like a cage. She had started to see herself as something more, someone with her own voice, her own choices, her own future to shape. Ethan's presence had been a constant source of support. Every step she took toward claiming her own path was bolstered by his quiet encouragement. It was a strange thing to rely on someone so completely, but for the first time, it felt natural. As they sat together one evening, looking out at the stars from the palace balcony, the soft hum of the night's activity filled the air around them. Ethan turned to Lyra, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but filled with something more, something deeper. Lyra, who had been gazing out at the horizon, turned her attention to him, sensing the change in his tone. "What about?" she asked, her voice soft, as if bracing herself for what was to come. Ethan hesitated, then spoke with conviction. "About us. About this, whatever it is we're building here." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words, but she kept her composure. She had spent so long building walls around herself, not letting anyone in. And yet, here she was, letting him in, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she never thought possible. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, but there was something in his eyes, something that told her he was speaking from the heart. "I mean, we're in this together. But I want you to know, it's not just about duty for me anymore. It's about you. It's about what you want, what you need." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had never let herself think about what she wanted before. For so long, she had been the queen's proxy, fulfilling others' expectations, playing a role she had never chosen. But now, with Ethan's words hanging in the air between them, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could choose for herself. "I don't know what I want," Lyra admitted, her voice shaky. "I've spent so long trying to be what everyone else needed me to be. I don't even know where to start." Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said softly. "It's okay to take your time. You don't have to have all the answers today." Lyra looked down at their hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the moment. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to. Maybe it was enough to just take the next step, to move forward with Ethan by her side. The stars above them seemed to shine a little brighter, the vastness of the universe no longer intimidating, but full of possibility. She looked back at Ethan, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "I think I'm ready," she said softly, her voice steady now. "Ready to find out what I want." Ethan's smile was warm, filled with pride and affection. "I'll be right here, Lyra. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." They stood together, hand in hand, as the night stretched on, the future uncertain, but for the first time, Lyra felt like she had a future, one she could shape on her own terms, with Ethan by her side, supporting her every step of the way. As the days passed, the shift in their relationship became more noticeable. Lyra had started to explore her newfound sense of self, and Ethan, ever the steady presence, was by her side, offering quiet support. They no longer simply talked about their duties or the responsibilities that weighed heavily on them. Instead, their conversations grew more personal, and Lyra began to find herself opening up in ways she hadn't before. One evening, as they sat together in the palace garden, Lyra found herself thinking about the path she was on. The weight of her responsibilities, the expectations placed on her by the Dominion, and the promise she had made to herself to find a life beyond those constraints all seemed to swirl in her mind. Ethan, sensing her unease, turned to her with a soft smile. "You seem deep in thought," he said, his voice calm. Lyra hesitated before speaking, her eyes fixed on the stars above them. "I've been wondering, what if this path I'm trying to carve for myself isn't enough?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with uncertainty. "What if I'm still just a product of what others expect me to be?" Ethan's expression softened, and he gently placed his hand over hers. "You're not what others expect you to be," he said, his words firm and reassuring. "You're Lyra, and that's what matters. You're already so much more than anyone could have imagined." Lyra felt a surge of warmth in her chest at his words, but she still carried the doubt that had been with her for so long. "But what if that's not enough?" she asked, the question lingering in the air between them. Ethan's smile deepened as he squeezed her hand gently. "Then you'll keep pushing forward," he said. "You'll keep figuring out who you want to be, one step at a time. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." Lyra looked at him then, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. In that moment, she realized that the fear she had felt about her future was beginning to fade. With Ethan by her side, she felt like she could face whatever lay ahead, even if she didn't have all the answers yet. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but sincere. "For everything." Ethan smiled, his gaze warm and steady. "Anytime," he replied. "That's what I'm here for." They sat in companionable silence, the sound of the night filling the space around them. Lyra didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know exactly what the future would hold. But for the first time, she felt ready to find out. And with Ethan by her side, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the stars twinkled above, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long while, She didn't feel like she had to carry the weight of the universe on her shoulders. She could take things one step at a time, with Ethan there to help her find her way. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation. Lyra and Ethan continued their journey, but the world around them seemed to shift in subtle ways. Lyra was no longer simply the Queen's proxy. She had begun to carve out her own identity, one that was not defined by others, but by herself. And Ethan, ever the steady presence, had become more than just her protector. He was her partner, her confidant, and the one person who made her believe in the possibility of a future beyond the confines of duty. They spent their time exploring the depths of their conversations, discussing everything from their past to their hopes for the future. Lyra began to share pieces of herself that she had never allowed anyone to see, and in turn, Ethan revealed parts of himself that he had long kept hidden. But even as their connection grew stronger, the reality of the political landscape loomed over them. The peace talks between Earth and the Tan Dominion were far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Lyra knew that her position as the Queen's proxy would always come with weighty responsibilities, and Ethan was all too aware of the dangers that surrounded them. Yet, despite the political tension and the uncertainty of their futures, they found comfort in each other's presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they found themselves walking through the royal gardens once more. The air was warm, carrying the scent of distant flowers and the promise of something new. Lyra's steps slowed as she looked up at the stars, her mind once again filled with questions about her place in the world. Ethan, sensing her unease, turned to her with a soft smile. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Lyra paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I keep wondering," she began, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "if there will ever come a time when I'm truly free. Free to choose my own path. Free from the expectations of others." Ethan's heart ached for her. He had seen the weight she carried, the pressure to live up to others' demands, and he knew how hard it was for her to imagine a life outside of that. "You are already free, Lyra," he said softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "You've already taken the first step by choosing to be who you are. The rest will come, one step at a time." Lyra looked down at their hands, her heart swelling with gratitude. His words were simple, yet they held a truth that she had been afraid to believe for so long. She had spent so much of her life following a path laid out for her by others, but now, with Ethan by her side, she realized that she didn't have to follow that path anymore. She could choose her own direction. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for believing in me." Ethan smiled, his thumb gently brushing over her hand. "I always will," he said, his voice filled with certainty. As they stood there, side by side, the weight of their shared understanding settled between them. They didn't have all the answers, and the future was still uncertain, but they both knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. And for the first time, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey ahead was hers to shape, and with Ethan by her side, she was ready to take the next step. The weeks continued to pass, and Lyra and Ethan found themselves at a crossroads. The peaceful days they had spent growing closer had been precious, but now, the reality of their situation was creeping back in. The peace talks between Earth and the Tan Dominion were drawing to a close, and the weight of the future began to settle back onto Lyra's shoulders. She was still the proxy, the Queen's stand-in, and no matter how much she wished to carve out a different future for herself, the responsibilities of her position were never far from her mind. Yet, despite the looming duties ahead, Lyra felt a quiet confidence she had never known before. Ethan had shown her that there was more to life than just following orders, and as the days grew closer to the conclusion of the talks, Lyra began to feel a sense of purpose she had never imagined. One evening, as they walked through the grand halls of the palace, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that change was in the air. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice a mix of determination and uncertainty. "What if this is the last step? What if this is it, and I have to return to being nothing more than the Queen's proxy?" Ethan glanced at her, his expression calm but resolute. "You're already more than that, Lyra. You've already become the person you were meant to be. Nothing can take that away from you." Lyra stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "But the Dominion, the Council, they will never see me for who I am. They see me as the Queen's tool, a means to an end. Do you really think I can change that? Ethan stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her arm. I don't know what the future holds, Lyra, but I know this. You've already changed. You're not the same person who first arrived here. You've found your voice. You've started to live for yourself, not for anyone else. Lyra looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Ethan's words were a lifeline, a reminder that she had come so far from where she had started. I never thought I could be free, she whispered. Not until you showed me that I could be. Ethan's smile was soft, warm. You always had it in you. I just helped you see it. The moment hung between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Lyra knew that no matter what the future held, she was no longer just a reflection of the Queen's will. She was her own person, someone capable of making her own choices. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the political pressures were not over, but Lyra had made peace with the fact that she didn't have to have all the answers. As long as she had Ethan by her side, she could face whatever came next. Thank you, she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. For everything. Ethan reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. You don't need to thank me, he said quietly. I'll always be here for you. You're not alone in this. Lyra smiled, the weight of her past lifting with his words. She had found her strength, and with Ethan's unwavering support, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would carve out a future that was truly their own, one step at a time.